On. Hello, people. Welcome to episode, I want to say 11 of the Recreational Bodybuilding Podcast. I really should figure out what number this is before I actually go on, because every time I introduce it's always with a question, whether it's the actual episode or not. But hey ho. So I am with Mr. Jack Rayner as always for another Q&A episode. Jack, do you want to give us an update on how you're getting on just in life? We don't need a full debrief, but how things going on in lockdown for you?
Yeah, shit. No, I'm joking. You are correct. It is episode 11. No, training's going well. Nutrition's a bit flexible. I think I was speaking on Instagram the other day about like kind of almost like the tracking dial. You kind of obviously in times of like high stress, you just turn the tracking dial a little bit down. So tracking is a little bit loose right now. Probably like tracking like 70% of my intake. And yeah, training's going well. I mean, we spoke off there briefly, talking about obviously the gyms could reopen. We're not sure, but I'm just kind of eager to get back into the gym. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I think we all are at this point. Like I said, there's only so much enjoyment you can get from doing the same exercises with the same piece of equipment. And I don't know about you, but I've got the dumbbells that you sort of unscrew, take plates off, and put back on again. And if anything, it's just really time consuming and boring to know that like across 3 different exercises, you've got to take a few plates off and add them back in again. And it's just little things like that that I found really sort of, I'm almost trying to choose exercises where I don't have to move the weights off and on. And now I've left all my dumbbells, and I've left all the dumbbells outside. And it's been raining, so they're all now getting rusty. There's like spiders and stuff on them, which as someone who has a fear of spiders isn't a great thing. And then I'm trying to I had a few days where I'm about to train in the rain, just because I've no inside space at all. So it's I'm ready for a nice sort of air-conditioned gym with predictable temperatures and nice lot of equipment where I can actually go heavier than a 20-kilogram dumbbell.
Yeah, and also you don't go outside and like have a full body session plus tens.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. One of the screws, because it's like a metal screw, has got like a nidge in it, like so it's like a metal like thing. So I did it 2 days in a row. I turned it and like it caught my finger, sliced my finger wide open, and I was like, okay. The next day, I was like, right, I'm gonna look out for this. The moment I did that, I did it again, sliced another finger. I was like, fuck. Like it's just little things like that that just make. It's not so much the actual programming because you can get over that, but it's just the environment as a whole. I think can sort of. I know we spoke about it in the last episode about the importance of a gym environment, but starting to realize just how actually having a gym rather than it doesn't matter what gym right now, just having a gym can be a lot.
Yeah, I think at the start of lockdown, it was quite like I don't know about you. I found it really like really cool trying to program clients like specifically for like banded workouts. And I was like, right, what have you got in your house? Have you got a frying pan? Like, let's crack some eggs. That could be the weight. Like just stuff like that. Well, obviously not like that, but just being really like innovative with like how can we leg extension? How can we like leg curl and everything else like that. So at the start, it was like really cool, and then once it got like 2 weeks in, we were like, oh, fuck this shit.
That's exactly what I was like, oh great, like I can I'm going to be doing like all these high rep stuff of like sets to 30, going to be really intense. I'm going to do like loads of my reps. It's going to be great. Like I'm going to really push myself. 2 weeks in, I was like, I want to die. Like I just want to do a nice set of 8 to 12 with
it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard like finding that second gear. Like I don't know about you, but like in the gym, you've got the like weight and you can just kind of sit on a machine and just kind of go. It's very easy to like take it close to failure. Whereas it's like when you've got like banded work or something, it's very hard to then like kind of right, here's where I've got like 5 reps in reserve. Here's where like it gets real, and it's really hard to then go like kind of click on and then just keep repping for 5. It's really it's really easy just to go right, okay, that'll do. That's why I'm training to failure now, because I'm just like, right, I know this is failure.
Yeah, and that's the exact same with me, especially with banded work. Like, I think with dumbbells, when you gauge like 4 or 5 reps in reserve, you can get a good idea, even in the high rep ranges. But with banded, because of the resistance curve, I think it's really difficult to figure out actually what is 5 reps. Like, it feels really difficult, but like, I think deep down, you can probably get like 10 more, and it's just like, oh my God, this is hell. And that's why I've been sort of training to failure, in the sense of I'm pushing every set as far as I'm willing to go. I don't think every set is actually failure, by no means. I think a lot of it is probably closer to 2.
Yeah, I think you're going. I think you're going to go to failure, then kind of almost guaranteeing your kind of 2 reps in reserve, which is okay.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. Anyway, let's jump into some of the questions that we got from old Insta. So, I don't have the names, so apologies for those who asked. You don't get any credit. But anecdotally, what do you think is the best frequency for training side delts?
Okay, cool. So, yeah, it's hard for me to give you like a right. Okay, there's your number, because like for me, I could probably hit side delts like probably 5 times per week without much issue. It would just mean like you got kind of intra session like MEV and MRV. Are you doing enough to kind of apply a stressor and a positive kind of adaptation, and then are you after kind of not letting your muscle heal and then hitting it again? So I think we could definitely hit the side delt 5 times per week without much kind of like muscle soreness and everything else like that. But it's hard to gauge. Like if you go for the top end, it's hard to gauge if you're doing enough or if you're doing too much. I would say start at obviously 2, and then see if you can work yourself, kind of work your way up. I would plant not a lot of volume, but I'll plant quite a lot of volume via like a lat raise or something like that. I wouldn't necessarily go for something like an overhead press. And I'm finding it more and more, what would you call it? I suppose I don't necessarily like the upright row too much now. And it's something that I've been thinking about quite recently, and more for the fact that people assume that it would hit like side delt. It's not really. It's kind of like trap and front delt. So we get a lot of kind of front delt kind of work from pressing. Maybe not necessarily now, but so yeah, I would say for the most part, like a shoulder press and a very high rep range, preferably seated. Overhead standing is more core work, and yeah, then the rest in a lat raise. Sick.
Yeah, I think largely agree with everything you said. I think the big thing is really an open question around best frequency, right? Because it's you need to determine how much volume you're actually doing in a session. So if you're doing like 8-10 sets of shoulder work or delt work in a single session, chances are you're not going to be doing the same the next day. But I do find any way that spreading out delt volume throughout the week has been beneficial. So for the longest time, I was just doing 2 times a week. Sometimes I had a pressing movement in anyway. I think the past 12 months, I'd started doing closer to 3 times, just to try and space it out without it interfering too much with like chest work. And I found that to be really good. So I'd almost like do it on like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, or Saturday, sorry. And I found that really useful. And I actually found my delts to grow a lot better. And I actually found my delts to grow more taking out pressing work completely. For the longest time, I was a big advocate of sort of overhead pressing, shoulder pressing. This is the days of watching Matt August doing like ridiculous pushing for like overhead pressing for like 2 plates, and like that was like the goal for me. And it's just like they're really good exercises, and I really enjoyed doing them. I just wouldn't consider them a delt exercise in no means. Like, do I ever never get a pump from them? Whereas if I just did primarily side raises, upright rows I'm actually a fan of, and then like maybe another variation of a side raise, like a cable version, that just sort of blows up your your side delts massively. So it does depend on, I guess it depends on how much volume you're doing in a session. I would usually cap it at like, I think if you're doing any more than 6, I would question it in a single session. I think there's probably a bit more of a justification to spread that out a bit more. I do find doing less sets for side delts to be more beneficial, just because there's less variation that you can do for that muscle group in a set. Whereas like for chest, you can do like a press and a fly and get a good amount of volume. Doing like 8 sets of side raises can be quite a bore, and I don't think those last 3 are going to be really that good. And if you're not doing press, I think if you're trying to do pressing, I think your frequency is going to be less just because of the central fatigue, I think, more than anything else. But yeah, I would say hard to gauge, but definitely 2 times per week, maybe 3 to 4, 5, if you've really got everything lined up and you got your head screwed on right. Don't just jump from 2 to 5 in 1 week. Do
No,
5.
sure.
Do 5 when you need to do 5 rather than because you want to do 5.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing that's really cool, and I think I wrote an infographic on this a while ago, was like if you're training 5 times per week, you could try like every alternate, do kind of side delt, and then the next day do a rear delt, and then side delt, rear delt. I think that's quite a cool thing to try and see how you get on with it. It's not obviously like do this. It's just saying like it's a very easy way to kind of hit delts every single day whilst kind of managing all of that, managing recovery, etc.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I did actually with I did rear delts 3 times a week, side delts 3 times a week on alternating days, and I found that to be a really good sort of balance across them both. Cool. Next question. Why does scale weight tend to fluctuate with different sleeping patterns and or levels of stress?
Okay. So if we say stress, that could mean that we're like people have a very emotional attachment to food, so it could just be very simply you're overeating, and that's where the scale weight comes up. So in terms of the sleep and stress, etc., when you are stressed, we tend to hold on to a lot of kind of water. So it could be that as well. There's a whole host of issues like of kind of reasons why scale weight would pop up. A lot of them would be kind of and I don't want to get too nitty gritty, but a lot of it would be kind of hormone kind of variation or issues there. Again, I'm an online coach, so I'm not going to go off on hormones like some people. But yeah, no. So very briefly and generally, like hormone, sleep quality, and stress, etc., could be kind of like the attachment of water. Then that could be the scale weight pop up, or the stress would be an emotional attachment to eating, which means you kind of eat a little bit more than your daily allowance, and that's where the scale weight pops up as well. So,
yeah, I think I always jump whenever sort of the weight jumps from one day to another in a given day. My first question is usually 1, how much sleep did you get that night? And 2, what time was your last meal? And what time did you weigh yourself the next day? Because I find a lot of the time they will be weighing themselves. They will have their last meal at like 10 p.m. and then weigh themselves at 8 a.m. Then the next day they eat at like midnight and then weigh themselves at 5 a.m. And it's just like a really practical, not a practical thing, but like a really obvious thing that people don't think about is like, okay, you ate closer to before when you weighed in and you got less sleep. Therefore, there's probably going to be more food in your system that hasn't really digested yet. And so that's causing the extra weight, and it has nothing to do with hormones or things like that. It's just like a really practical thing that I find, and I've had to be aware of that myself when I'm dieting. Is like I will be weighing myself consistently, and I have this big jump in weight. And I'm like, all right, what happened yesterday that caused that? And like before you start panicking, and usually it's like, okay, either I ate later or had a really big meal that was high in fiber the night before, right before bed. And then I've woken up early or or didn't have that good a quality sleep. And that's what's caused the fluctuation in the weight. And then I guess a more long-term or more consistent sort of fluctuations, then I would then start to look at stress and just stress levels, overall sleep quality over the course of like weeks. And then you can usually put that down to I guess, hormones in some way.
Yeah, for sure. One very cool thing that I had to do, it's probably about 6 months ago now, was actually had to write out a document just kind of saying how to kind of weigh yourself. And it's a very simple thing that I did, but it's been really effective. Weigh yourself basically, or try to weigh yourself at the same time every single day. Expect at weekends your weight's going to be you're going to be a little bit lighter, just due to the fact that you might eat at the same time, but you wake up like 2 or 3 hours later. So you're going to be, that's why I almost used to guarantee that in a fat loss phase that someone's had a new low weigh-in on a Saturday or Sunday. They're like, oh, wow. It's like, yeah, well, this happens every Sunday because you woke up later. But yeah, a very practical thing that, like, off the back of your answer was, yeah, just obviously wake up or try to have your last meal at the same time every single day. Of course, doesn't always pan out like that. Like, you go out with friends, etc. One thing that I will say about that is, if you do go out with friends and go to a restaurant, which is probably not happening right now, or it could be happening right now, we're actually open up. So the scale weight I tend to ignore the next day. So we kind of neglect that data. We don't even put it in, and then have that as kind of the anomaly data.
Yeah. And actually, I think one thing in the other direction is when you consume alcohol the night before as well, you can sometimes get dehydrated. I've had it like years ago when I was dieting. I had it a few times where I'd like go out for a few drinks at nighttime during the diet, and then I'd wake up the next day like lighter. I'm like, great, I can do this. And it's like, no, actually, just the alcohol tends to dehydrate you a little bit, and sometimes that's what's caused a lighter weigh-in. So that's something else to look out for as well, is alcohol consumption.
That's when you're dieting and drinking, that's just hell. I think I went to my stag do off the back of my mini cut, so I was like pretty lean, and I got there and I had like 2 or 3 pints. I was like, I'm not okay.
That's me usually, just with my lack of drinking experience over the past like 8 years. It's just yeah. How when you're dieting, just a sort of quick tangent, how do you tend to find yourself or with clients getting a bit too obsessed with the scale weight? Have you found that?
I've definitely found clients to be obsessed with it. And when I say this, I don't mean this in a like, oh, look at me, but I've never really had an issue with scale weight, and I've never had like a kind of, what would be the word, like body image issues. I've never had that. I don't know why I put it in air quotes. I've never had that. So I see that as kind of a blessing, but definitely with clients that they have a real emotional attachment to, why is this going up? Why is this going down, etc. And this comes back to our previous episode where we were talking about kind of the you're critiquing yourself and never praise the wins, etc. So when we have a new low weigh-in or a new high weigh-in, which is very important in the maths, when you have a new high weigh-in, celebrate that, especially when they're very kind of focused on the scale weight, and they're always like, they're kind of shocked to see the scale weight go up, go up, go up. It's like, no, change your attention to kind of celebrating you going in the other direction as well as the kind of the down direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I found myself, and I still do this, which is really bad, like when I'm dieting and I'm really quite deep into a diet and I'm looking, I do find myself sometimes getting a bit too attached to the scale weight, but I've had it a few times where like I will, when I wake up to like pee in the night, sometimes I will weigh myself in the middle of the night, full well knowing that the weight is not going to be what it's going to be when I weigh myself. But like, it's almost like I use it as like a pre-indicator to what my weight's going to be like when I wake up. So I'm like, I'll step on. If I'm certain weight, I can sort of, okay, I'm probably going to weigh this when I wake up. So it's good. Like, yeah. I don't know why I've done it. I've never been that like, if the scale doesn't show what I want it to, I don't really get too emotional about it. But it's sort of like a weird tendency that I tend to adopt when I'm when I'm deep into a diet. So it's
we'll be dieting together next year. So
hopefully, yes.
We'll have to change the podcast name as well to the Men's Physique.
Yeah, the Men's Physique non-recreational podcast. Yeah, maybe. Anyway, we don't know yet. That's
This is
still
the potential.
yeah, that's still very much in hindsight. I'm just focusing on getting through the year at the moment.
Sure.
But yeah. Okay, next question. Do you believe higher or lower fat intake when it's not an extreme make any difference in progress?
Mm, okay. See, I would always say that if you're going like, so it wouldn't be like saying keto, would it? It would just be saying like,
Basically, like within normal ranges of like a fat intake. So
yeah.
say the normal range was like between 30 and 70, like would it make much difference consuming 30 compared to 70?
I personally would say not necessarily. I would say that some people have a kind of they kind of reach for fatty foods more than like for me. I would always reach for like a carbohydrate source, so I would always go for I don't know. Say I'm in a shop and I'm going to get something to like sweets or chocolate, etc. I would always go for the sweet variation, whereas if someone could go for like the chocolate variation because they just naturally prefer like the like fat. So you get some people who have kind of a higher fat intake. They like olives, they like peanut butter, etc. They much prefer that to eating like a rice cake, or what? Maybe not. That's probably a poor. Uh, who likes rice cakes, Brett? Um, yeah, you
Caramel
like
ones are good though.
no, they're not.
Yeah.
You should try Cocoa Pops. Um, no, yeah. So yeah, you get some people who like way prefer cereal or peanut butter, etc. So I would say, as long as you feel okay, as in if you're so low and your carbohydrates are so high to increase your training performance, but you feel like crap, and you're not enjoying what you're eating, I would just say there's really no harm in kind of increasing that to 50 or 60 grams. But again, I wouldn't go below kind of the 0.35 per kg. Which saying that, you got to think that like that's a like I mean for a 100 kg guy, that's like 30, it is 35 grams, right? So like that's just tells you how low you can kind of get fat before any kind of hormone imbalance. I have had times where people get, and I've heard Mike Israel talk about this before. People get kind of fat hungry, and what that basically means is their fat is too low, their carbohydrates are so high, they feel really full, but they feel like they need something like a pizza or a burger or something, and I've only had that a couple of times where people have been I'm like I'm really full, but I really fancy this kind of scoop of peanut butter right now. So I would say in that case, yeah, would benefit from increasing your fat.
Yeah, I would agree largely with that. I think if it's within, if you're avoiding the extremes, I don't
Mm.
think there's not going to be much difference in performance, your ability to lose fat. I've never noticed, and I've not done it extensively, but I've never really noticed a difference in my ability to perform when having like super high carbs and low fat. Like I'm much more of a moderate sort of type of guy, but naturally my diet, and I've never really worried about the carb to fat ratio. Naturally, my fats tend to fall quite low anyway, because like you, I tend to go for carb options with the exception of chocolate. So like I will literally make room in my day every evening for a little bit of chocolate, and it tends to be that brings up my fats, if anything. So I've had it days where my fats are like less than maybe 20 throughout the day, but then because I'm having like two chocolate bars at night, like it sort of spikes it up to a normal range. So that's sort of how I played with that. But yeah, I think if you're avoiding the extremes, you feel like you're performing well in the gym, you're losing fat at a good rate, and you're not feeling, like you said, fat hungry, I think you're probably not going to see much difference in manipulating fats by 5 to 10 grams here and there. I think it
Yeah,
would be very difficult to track the difference in that.
yeah, I think it would be. Yeah, I'm not too sure how you would track that to be honest,
Mm.
but yeah, I'm almost like you where I have to like I have the kind of like the dark chocolate, and I think I'm putting that to the fact that I'm really liking coffee right now. But yeah, that's how I kind of like spike my fat up. The same with you. Naturally, I could probably go for about like 30 grams per day quite easily as well. And then yeah, the dark chocolate will put it up to like 50, 55, etc. So yeah,
Nice.
sick.
Would you guys ever program ISO holds? If so, where would you place them in a program?
Okay. I personally wouldn't. Just because I don't think that isometric contraction is necessary. I feel like you're probably having a lot of muscle damage for not too much benefit, if that makes sense. I don't know. I feel like you can largely get away with it, and like you could program it and it'd be completely fine. I think you've got to be a bit smart in the fact that maybe you could push it to like the last week of the meso and just chuck in a few. Like you could almost use it as that's how I kind of program like myo rep. I don't know about you, but I program kind of myo rep sets maybe at the end of a mesocycle. Just if someone likes them, they're like, right, I kind of want to go a bit hard this week. It's like, all right, cool. Here's some kind of myo rep sets, or like drop sets or giant sets, etc. Something like that. So yeah, you could place them there. If I was to program them, I'd probably place them there. Um, I don't know if there's much of a benefit doing it like in the middle of the mesocycle. I'm not too sure. But I personally would say, yeah, end of the mesocycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think practically, how would you even overload that in any essence? Like I guess you'd have to,
I think it'll be seconds, right?
yeah, exactly. Like,
And
I
then
don't know.
load.
Yeah, but I just don't think, why would you do iso holds if you've got the option of doing an actual muscle contraction, right? Like a concentric and eccentric. I think I might be wrong. I'm not really down with the research too much in the nitty gritty details, but I think they've done a few studies where they've compared the effects of concentric versus eccentric versus iso, and I think the isolation or the isometric, sorry, is it isometric? I'm right in thinking isometric, right? Isometric contractions are the least effective for muscle growth, and so I would say, why would you choose to do the least effective method when you've got two other options which are perfectly fine? And naturally, I think you can implement isometrics actually during a set anyway, a normal set. So if you're doing a bicep curl, you can literally just tense or contract your bicep hard at the top of a curl, and you'd probably get all the benefit from an isometric contraction that you need to. So I would look to do it there, and then, like you said, maybe sort of as a way to increase intensity at the end of a mesocycle. One example that sort of comes to mind is when you're doing side raises and you're doing it and you hit that wall where you literally just can't do it anymore. Maybe sort of, and usually you can raise your arms like a couple of degrees, but you just can't do it anymore without using momentum. Maybe holding it there for like 5 to 10 seconds as far as you can at the end of a mesocycle, just to sort of leach out any extra sort of growth from the exercise. Maybe a good way to do it. I can't really think of any other exercises where I would implement that really.
No, I was thinking the only exercise I can physically think of that would be any benefit. I think would be a lat raise.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to imagine like if it's something like a flat press.
How would you even do that? You'd have to have someone like trying to choke you, right?
I think it would be something like a lat raise. Bicep curls, I would assume that you're probably attacking more kind of like erectors, etc., just to kind of hold you up, just to kind of stabilize you. So I would say, yeah, I think you're right in the fact that I think it'd be lat raises.
Yeah, I've seen I can't remember his name, but the hypertrophy coach is his Insta handle, and I think he's implemented a few isometric exercises into his home training, and they looked interesting. Like I think he did it with like chest, where he was like had his like arms like this and just like really tensing his chest muscles together, and that might work, that might be okay. But I would always just argue, why not just do like an actual chest exercise in place of that.
So, yeah, Joe Bennett is
that's the one.
Yeah, he's very cool. Again, this is a thing that maybe we'll go on a tangent with maybe on another episode or podcast, etc. But always kind of challenge people in their views. So if someone puts something, like if I put something on social media, you have every right to say why or etc. Like why do you think this isn't right, etc. Like almost challenge everything that
Mhm.
anyone says. Like if someone puts something on social media, it's not always correct. So
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I find that the best people in the industry are the ones where you can actually challenge them, and they will come back with like a reasonable response that isn't an insult to you or your mother. Like,
yeah,
and I think the a really good example of this is the current sort of ongoing debate between 3DMJ and RP around the set increases. There's been a podcast, and I've just seen that RP have released an article sort of challenging back to their statements, and it's all in the name of sort of getting closer to the truth rather than we're right and you're wrong.
yeah,
And I think sort of being able to do that and having the confidence to maybe challenge someone, even if, because a lot of the time you might challenge what they're saying, and they could come back with a very reasonable response as to why, and you learn something new that day, which is
yeah,
great,
sure.
right? Like, and you're
Yeah,
you're better off for it. So I would always question why if it's not very clear. I didn't see the rationale as to why Joe implemented isolation holds. I just saw that he did it. So I'm not even gonna challenge him on that because I have no idea why. I don't know his rationale. So I would just always question why not do an actual exercise. So
yeah,
yeah.
sure. On the 3DMJ and RP front, I think the answer lies somewhere in between. I think both of their, I think if they work together, which they will, without a doubt. So I think the answer would lie, yeah, somewhere in between. I think that's a very cool argument with them too as well. I
And I,
basically, we well, I don't know about you, but I take both of their opinions and add it into everything I do. So
Absolutely, yeah, and I fully agree. I've not listened to the whole podcast on 3DMJ, but I know one topic that they were talking about was sort of proactively adding a predetermined number of sets per week rather than reactively.
yeah,
And I think when I got started with the whole sort of set increase week by week, I made that mistake. I
mm,
quickly learned that you can't really do that, and being more reactive is probably the answer.
yeah,
So yeah, I definitely agree with everything and if anything, they just drive home probably some of the misconceptions from what Mike puts out rather than the actual truth.
yeah,
And you actually find that they agree on 99% of what they're actually talking about, which is really good.
sure. Whenever I get like a new client, and they follow like the RP kind of, they follow the RP templates, etc. Like when they come to me and they do my check-in and they kind of message me back and say, like, why isn't there a set increases this week? It's like there's like you have to kind of explain that there's other ways to progressively overload other than sets, etc. So I do think that Mike and people at RP, yeah, I think the whole concept is very much misinterpreted. Like people assume that you have to get to MAV or MEV to MRV by adding sets all the way to it. It's like no, even Mike says that you don't need to do that. You have to look at the mini cut manual for that. You start and end the MEV. So yeah, well you go to MRV via MEV.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Awesome. We are at our final question. So this will be a good one for you, Jack. How do you get clients to adhere who currently don't? And I already know the answer.
Um, Cancel their ass. I'm joking. um, so yeah, okay. Again, I think this is going to be very much similar to the first question where I said like it's gonna be so individual, and that's the beauty of online coaching. Like you could get an individual and then they're saying like, or they're not adhering, they're not checking in, etc. And then you're all right, okay, like why are you not checking in? Like someone could have family issues, someone could have, I don't know, like as far as like an eating disorder, etc. And they're not kind of admitting that to you. And there's a whole host of different things. So the best kind of advice I would say, and I take it'd be from an online coach if they're saying why isn't a client adhering. The best thing you can do is really kind of establish why. Listen to them 100%. You got to like get to the root cause of that and then fix it. But I would always say do things that they enjoy as well. don't just kind of read a textbook and think, right, this is how to do things. It's not. There's so many other things you can do. If someone likes getting programmed for an overhead press, standing overhead press, and they like doing deadlifts and they like doing all of these things, and you find a way to put it in, and because that's what they enjoy. You can't just say like this is the textbook. This is what the textbook says. You're going to get a lot of systemic fatigue from it, etc., etc. It's like they enjoy it. They're going to turn up to the gym, and that is how you're going to get them to adhere. You have to do things that they enjoy.
Absolutely. I was going to use the overhead press myself as an example. I've actually got a client who we took it out in an effort to sort of be able to train delts a little bit more. And then he was like, nah, you know what? I really enjoy doing sort of a shoulder press. So great, we put it back in. Like it's such a, in the grand scheme of, especially when you're talking about adherence, in the grand scheme of like months and years, whether they do a shoulder press or not for overall muscle growth should be on the lowest part of your priority list from a client perspective. Like, and I think I agree with what you're saying from a just an overall adherence is just listen to what they're telling you and ask questions and try and find the root cause for a lot of this. I think one example I would use is I had a client who didn't want to track one day because a colleague brought like cake into work and he had like a bigger slice than he cared to admit and he didn't want to track, right? And so by having a conversation with them and sort of educating them as well and trying to help them with their unique problem rather than just sort of throwing generic advice out there or telling them to work harder or do better next time, by actually establishing what the problem was, working with them rather than telling them, working with them on a viable solution to not be perfect, but maybe to do a little bit better, can tend to go a long way. I think a lot of it is reassurance as well. When someone does maybe isn't adherent on some parts, a big part of what I like to emphasize is just empathy and actually just reassuring them like it's not a big deal. Like one meal or 1 week isn't a huge dint. That can sort of help them feel better overall. And then that example that I used about cake is like the next week, literally the very next week, a colleague brought in pizza and he was able to track it as part of his diet, move on, and actually stayed on track throughout the whole week. Like, and even one thing I found in that is listening not only to what they're saying, but how they're saying it and some of the terminology and phrases that they tend to use. You'll get a lot of insight into their mindset and their perception on certain topics. And I found that as a really good example around how he didn't want to track this because he felt bad about having this types of food. And then the next week, it was almost like it wasn't even a big issue. He just did it and moved on throughout the rest of his day. So I think there's no right answer for how to get a client to adhere. By no means. It's just a case of almost diagnosing the issues as they come for a lot of it. Being empathetic and an understanding that sometimes they're just not going to adhere. Like no matter what tools you give them, sometimes they're just going to have a week where things don't go to plan. And that could be something that's completely out of your control. Like you said, like if a family member's died, like what are you going to tell them? Like you're going to tell them to manipulate their calories for the rest of the week, or like to lower the calories next week in order to stay on track. Like it's going to be one of those times that you just say, right, okay, let's not worry about anything right now. You've gone through something that's drastic. Like adherence isn't the problem right now. It's about actually getting yourself back in an emotional state. So sometimes it's not only about getting them to adhere, but sometimes understanding that there are going to be times where they're just not going to, and you have to understand that as a coach and almost be that reassurance and that shoulder for them to actually go to.
Yeah, for sure. I think that one thing that like we're both working as well as being online coaches. So I think one thing that really kind of plays to at least my advantage, maybe yours as well, is the fact that we obviously work and then do this on the side. So we kind of empathize with their situation because we're likely going through a very similar situation. We're likely, like, I don't know about you, but like if you're in an office, someone's kind of bought cake and you're like, how did I deal with that? How can I apply this to this guy? With some of the best coaches that I know have always come from like a work background and then like a coach background. So you've got kind of the empathy side of it. There's no like it's no good not having that work experience and then telling them what to do because you don't have a fucking clue. Like if you're just sitting on your ass being an online coach from the age of like 17 to whatever, and you're telling them how to maneuver around a certain situation that you've not personally been in, then yeah, I think I've got an edge over you by being in that experience.
Yeah, and actually, the being in an office is a perfect example because, like, you'll see a lot of like you might see a lot of coaches like, oh, like when people bring in like have to eat some of the food that comes into the office, like you might get a coach for like, well, don't eat it, right? You're on a plan, and sometimes it's not that easy because you almost have like this social pressure to conform in a certain way. Like someone's coming around with cakes, and everyone on your sort of bank of desks or like around you is saying yes. Sometimes it's a lot harder to say no than what some people might think. It's not a case of they're saying no, they can't say no because then they don't want to stick to the plan or they've got cravings. That's not the issue. It's almost like they're saying no because they don't want to be called out in front of people and they don't want to have that conversation about how they're on a diet. And sometimes like being in that environment, like you said, can sort of put you in an advantage. I think sort of from previous experience myself, I know something that I definitely have the ability to be more empathetic towards moving forward is parents and dads and newborn dads in particular, right? Like I can sort of, if I get clients in the future that are sort of going through that process, I can definitely have first-hand experience and be able to sort of use my experiences to almost help them as well. Sort of a learning, whereas like you might have someone who has no idea. I know from myself, like if I had a client who had just had a kid, I'm just like, well, you've got to prioritize the time to go to the gym and you got to make time for it. It's really not as easier said than done. So like actually going through that myself is I found that it's a lot better to sort of help them, and then you can sort of formulate plans together with that in mind to help them stay on track for the long run rather than maybe a short period of time.
For sure.
Yeah. Sick, as Jack would say.
I don't know why I say that.
Yeah, at the end of every question, it's just like a peace out moment, like a mic drop. Nice. Okay, that brings us to the end. I think that was quite a lengthy chat actually, which was decent.
It's a girthy chat.
A girthy chat. Wow, that's not a way that you want to describe anything in life. Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for listening. If you made it this far, we'll be back in 2 weeks maybe for another episode. And we will speak to you soon. Peace.